Welcome back, everyone, to a new story. We really hope you enjoy it. You think you know who you are? I certainly did. My name was Miles Larson, and my identity was forged in steel and sky. I was a captain for a major airline, 35 years old, with a jawline that could cut glass and a confidence that could part clouds. My life was a series of takeoffs and landings, both on the runway and in the bedroom. The world was my oyster, and women were the pearls I collected, admired for a short while, and then discarded for the next shiny thing. I tell you this not to brag, but so you understand the height from which I fell. Heather was one of those pearls, a flight attendant. Of course, they were always the easiest. We shared the same recycled air, the same time zone blurring schedules, the same sterile hotel rooms. She was sweet, with warm brown eyes and a laugh that felt genuine, which was a novelty. We'd been seeing each other for about 3 months, a record for me. For her, it was clearly something more. I could see it in the way she started leaving a toothbrush in my travel bag, the way she'd talk about next Christmas as if it were a shared destination on our flight plan. The end came, as it always did, in a soulless airport hotel room in Chicago. The air conditioning hummed a monotonous drone, and the city lights painted sterile patterns on the ceiling. "Miles, I was thinking," she started, her voice soft as she traced a pattern on my chest. "My lease is up in 2 months. Maybe I could just move my things to your place. It would be so much easier than finding a new apartment." There it was, the final approach, the request for commitment that was my cue to eject. I shifted, dislodging her hand, and sat up. The practiced speech was already forming on my lips. "Heather, look," I began, my tone calm and reasonable, the one I used to reassure nervous passengers during turbulence. "This has been great, a lot of fun, but we both knew what this was from the start. I'm not a settling down kind of guy. My life is up in the air, you know." The light in her eyes flickered and died. It was a look I'd seen before, a cocktail of shock, hurt, and dawning humiliation. "What are you saying? You said you were starting to feel something real." "I get caught up in the moment sometimes," I said with a shrug, swinging my legs over the side of the bed and reaching for my uniform pants. "It's the lifestyle. High altitudes, low inhibitions." Tears welled in her eyes and her voice became thick. "So that's it, 3 months, and I'm just turbulence, a layover." "Don't be so dramatic," I sighed, buttoning my shirt. I hated this part. The crying. It was so messy. We had a good time. Let's just leave it at that. Okay. But she didn't leave it at that. She stood up, wrapping the thin hotel sheet around her body, her face a mask of fury and heartbreak. "A good time. You used me. Miles, you made me feel like I was special, like I was different from all the others you talk about." Her voice rose, cracking with emotion. "You treat women like they're disposable, like we're just part of the in-flight service. You flirt, you charm, you get what you want, and then you move on without a second thought." I just kept dressing, pulling on my socks, tying my shoes. The less I engaged, the faster it would be over. "I hope one day you get to feel what this is like," she screamed, her voice echoing in the small room. The words were pure, uncut rage. "I hope you know what it's like to be treated like an object, to be looked at and used and then tossed aside. I hope you get a taste of your own medicine. I hope you know exactly what it feels like to be treated like some ditzy flight attendant." As she spat out the last words, a sudden, inexplicable chill swept through the room. It wasn't the air conditioning. This was a deep, penetrating cold, like a pocket of Arctic air materializing out of nowhere. It raised the hairs on my arms and made me shiver involuntarily. The window rattled in its frame. Just once, a sharp, percussive sound that cut through her yelling. Then, as quickly as it came, it was gone. The room was back to its normal, stuffy temperature. I paused, my hand on my pilot's cap, a flicker of genuine unease passing through me. It was just a draft. I told myself, a pressure change, nothing more. I turned back to her, my face a mask of cool indifference. "Are you done?" She stared at me, her chest heaving, tears streaming down her face. She looked broken. A small, ugly part of me felt a flicker of triumph. I had won. I was free. Yeah, she whispered, her fight gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I'm done. Good. I placed my cap on my head, adjusting it in the mirror. The 4 stripes on my epaulets gleamed under the hotel lighting. I was Captain Miles Larson. I was in control. I've got an early flight. I'll see you around. I didn't look back as I walked out the door, letting it click shut behind me, sealing off the sound of her quiet sobbing. The cold gust of wind was already forgotten, dismissed as a strange anomaly. I had no idea it was an omen. I had no idea that her hysterical, desperate words weren't just a curse, but a flight plan for the complete and utter demolition of my life. The flight back to New York was routine. Clear skies, a tailwind, and a smooth landing at JFK. I forgot about Heather the moment the wheels left the tarmac. She was just another piece of turbulence in my rearview mirror. But something was off. It started with small things, whispers of change so quiet I could easily dismiss them. The day after the Chicago incident, I was in my apartment, shaving. I nicked myself under the chin, which was unusual. My razor usually glided. I looked closer in the mirror, frowning. My skin seemed smoother, less weathered. I chalked it up to the hotel soap. A few days later, I was talking to my first officer, a guy named Ben. During our pre-flight checks, mid-sentence, my voice cracked, pitching up like a teenager's. I cleared my throat, embarrassed. Ben shot me a weird look. Everything all right? Captain, you sound a little hoarse. Just a bit dry, I lied, taking a sip of water, cabin air. But it happened again a day later, and my voice, even when it was stable, seemed to have lost some of its baritone resonance. It was a subtle shift, a lightness that hadn't been there before. I started avoiding long conversations, blaming a sore throat. Then came the hair. My regulation short haircut seemed to be growing out at an accelerated rate. What was normally a 4-week trip to the barber was becoming a 2-week necessity. And the texture was different, softer. I found myself unconsciously running my fingers through it, a nervous, almost preening gesture that felt utterly foreign. The most disturbing changes were the ones happening to my body. I've always been fit, with the lean, wiry build of a man who spends more time sitting than lifting. But now the smattering of hair on my chest and arms seemed to be thinning, fading away. After a shower, I'd look in the mirror and swear there was less of it than the day before. My skin, all over, was losing its rough edges, becoming soft to the touch. And there was a new sensitivity, my chest, specifically, a strange persistent tingling in my nipples that sometimes sharpened into a dull ache. It was distracting, unsettling. I'd be in the cockpit, going through a checklist, and this odd sensation would pull my focus. I started wearing an undershirt, hoping the extra layer would stop my uniform from brushing against my chest and triggering the feeling. It didn't help. The psychological shifts were even more insidious. My legendary confidence, my defining trait, was starting to erode. I found myself second-guessing decisions I'd have made in my sleep a month ago. My swagger was gone, replaced by a hesitant, uncertain gait. And the women, my primary hobby, my raison d'etre, I just wasn't interested. A beautiful gate agent who had been giving me eyes for weeks finally asked me out for a drink. I heard the words coming out of my mouth before I could stop them. I'm busy, thanks, though. I walked away, my heart pounding, not with excitement, but with a strange, unidentifiable anxiety. The interest was being replaced by something else, something I refused to name. I'd find my eyes lingering on my male coworkers, not in a friendly, collegial way. I'd noticed the way Captain Darren Fields, a senior pilot with salt and pepper hair and a charismatic smile, filled out his uniform. I'd watch the muscles in his forearms as he adjusted the controls and feel a hot flush creep up my neck. I'd recoil from the thought immediately, disgusted and confused. I was Miles Larson. I dated flight attendants. I was the guy other guys wanted to be. This wasn't me. It couldn't be. I was on the ground, in my apartment, when the first real wave of panic hit. It had been about 3 weeks since Chicago. I just landed from a transatlantic flight, feeling exhausted and strangely frail. I stripped off my uniform and stood in front of the full-length mirror on my closet door. The man looking back at me was a softer, more delicate version of myself. My jawline had lost its sharp edge. My shoulders seemed narrower. My waist, where my pants had felt unusually loose all day, seemed to taper slightly. And my chest, there was no mistaking it now. My pecs were no longer flat and masculine. They were soft, rounded, with small but definite swellings beneath the nipples. They looked like the beginnings of breasts. I touched one, my fingers trembling. It was tender, pliant. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "What the hell is happening to me?" I whispered to the stranger in the mirror. My mind, searching for any rational explanation, snagged on Heather's screaming face. "I hope you know what it feels like, to be treated like some ditzy flight attendant." The memory was followed by the phantom sensation of that unnatural, bone-deep chill. No, it was impossible. Curses weren't real. This was a hormonal imbalance, a tumor, something medical. I had to see a doctor. But a deep, cold dread told me a doctor wouldn't find anything. This wasn't a disease. This was something else. Something was rewriting me, cell by cell. And I had no idea how to stop it. The whispers of change were becoming a roar, and I was terrified of what they were trying to say. The cockpit became my only sanctuary. It was the only place where the changes seemed to halt. I started noticing a pattern every time I was on the ground. The transformation accelerated. My layovers became periods of intense anxiety and dread. But once the plane was in the air, climbing to 30,000 feet, it was as if a cosmic pause button had been pressed. The tingling in my chest would subside. My thoughts would clear. And for a few precious hours, I could almost feel like the old Miles again. The sky was my refuge, the earth my personal hell. This realization led me to pick up as many long-haul flights as I could. More time in the air meant less time on the ground for this thing to work on me. But I couldn't stay airborne forever. Landings were inevitable. And with every landing came a new horrifying betrayal from my own body. My height was the next to go. I used to be a solid 6 feet tall. Now I felt shorter. I'd stand next to Ben, my first officer, who I'd always been a couple of inches taller than, and find myself looking up slightly to meet his eyes. My uniform pants started bunching at my ankles. One day, in the crew lounge, Ben clapped me on the shoulder. "You know, Miles, I never realize how I tower over you. You always seem so large and in charge in the captain's chair." I froze, my blood turning to ice. "What are you talking about? We're practically the same height." He laughed. "Nah, man, I've got a good 4 or 5 inches on you. Always have." It was the first sign that the world was changing to accommodate my new reality. It wasn't just my body. It was people's memories of me. The curse, or whatever it was, wasn't just altering me. It was altering my history, papering over the cracks to make the impossible seem plausible. My face was undergoing a similar, terrifying metamorphosis. The subtle softening I'd noticed before was now a full-scale feminization. My brow bone was less prominent, my cheeks were fuller, and my lips seemed plumper. My eyes, once narrowed with practiced confidence, now seemed larger, more open, more innocent. I looked younger, too. The faint lines around my eyes and mouth, earned from years of flying and late nights, were gone. I looked less like a 35-year-old captain and more like someone in their early 20s. The changes in my body were impossible to hide, even from myself. My hips had started to widen, giving my body a gentle, terrifying curve. My waist cinched in, creating a silhouette that was undeniably feminine. And my chest was no longer a matter of paranoid speculation. I had breasts. Small, but perfectly formed. About a B cup, they strained against the fabric of my pilot's shirt, creating a soft, rounded shape that made a mockery of my uniform. Panic became my constant companion. I started avoiding mirrors, avoiding my reflection in the polished chrome of the cockpit instruments, but I couldn't avoid the physical sensations. The unfamiliar weight on my chest, the way my new hips made me walk with a different rhythm, the constant feeling of my clothes fitting wrong. One night, after a flight from London, I walked into my apartment and the wrongness was overwhelming. My suit jacket felt tight across my new chest but loose at the shoulders. My pants were baggy in the waist but snug across my hips and rear. It felt like I was wearing a costume, and a poorly fitting one at that. I stripped everything off in a frenzy and stood in front of the mirror, forcing myself to look, really look. The person staring back at me was a stranger, a slender, androgynous figure with soft curves, longish brown hair falling into wide, frightened eyes, and the undeniable breasts of a woman. My male genitalia, still there for now, seemed alien and out of place on this new body, a final stubborn remnant of the man I used to be. I let out a choked sob, a sound more delicate and high-pitched than I intended, the reflection's face crumpled in perfect sync. This couldn't go on. I couldn't pilot a plane looking like this. I'd be grounded, forced into a medical evaluation that I could never pass. They'd think I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. In a fit of desperation, I tried to reclaim some semblance of masculinity. I grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen drawer and hacked at my hair, trying to restore my short, severe cut, but the soft locks fell unevenly, framing my delicate face in a way that only made me look more like a girl with a bad haircut. I tried doing push-ups, trying to rebuild my pectoral muscles, to flatten the damning evidence on my chest, but my arms were weaker now, and I collapsed after only a few, my new breasts aching with the effort. It was hopeless. I was losing. The man in the mirror was fading, and this new person, this strange, soft creature, was taking his place. The betrayal wasn't just in the mirror, it was in my own cells, my own bones, my own DNA. They had all switched allegiance, and I was being overthrown from the inside out. The day my uniform officially stopped fitting was the day the denial shattered for good. I tried to button my pilot's shirt, and the fabric pulled so tight across my chest that the button popped off. Skittering across the hardwood floor, I looked down at the gaping fabric, at the soft swell of my B-cup breasts straining against my undershirt. This wasn't something I could hide anymore. My pants were a disaster. I had to cinch my belt to the last notch to keep them from sliding off my narrow waist. But the fabric was stretched to its limit across my hips and backside. I felt ridiculous, like a child playing dress-up in their father's clothes. I had a flight to San Francisco in 2 days. I couldn't show up looking like this. I needed clothes, new clothes, and with a sinking, nauseating certainty, I knew my old haunts in the men's department wouldn't have anything for my new proportions. A strange compulsion, a whisper in the back of my mind that didn't feel like my own, guided my actions. It told me what I needed to do, where I needed to go. It felt less like a decision and more like following a pre-written script. That afternoon, I found myself standing outside a large department store, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was wearing a baggy hoodie and sunglasses, trying to be as anonymous as possible. The women's section was on the second floor. It felt like a foreign country, one I had no visa for. Taking a deep breath, I walked in, head down, and made a beeline for the escalators, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The second floor was a kaleidoscope of color and soft fabrics, racks of dresses, blouses, and skirts stretched out in every direction. The air smelled faintly of perfume. It was overwhelming, alien territory. I felt every eye in the store on me. I was an intruder, a pervert, a man trespassing in a sacred female space. My hands were sweating. I just wanted to turn and run. But the compulsion pushed me forward. It guided me toward a rack of simple silk blouses. My hand, acting of its own accord, reached out and touched the fabric. It was cool and smooth, utterly unlike the starchy cotton of my pilot's shirts. A tiny shameful part of me liked the feeling. "Can I help you find something, sir?" I jumped, snatching my hand back as if the blouse were red hot. A saleswoman, a kindly-looking woman in her 50s with a warm smile, was standing beside me. No, I'm looking for a gift," I stammered, the lie feeling clumsy and obvious on my tongue. "For my sister." "Of course," she said, her smile never wavering. "What's her size?" I stared at her blankly. I had no idea what my size was. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "I'm not sure," I mumbled. "She's about my height, slender." The woman looked me up and down, her eyes professional but perceptive. She saw the baggy hoodie, the way I was hunched in on myself. She probably saw the faint curves I was trying so desperately to hide. "Well," she said gently, pulling a soft, cream-colored blouse from the rack. "Maybe something like this. A medium should work. Why don't you take it to the fitting room, just to be sure?" She was offering me an out, a way to do this without having to explain the inexplicable. My throat was so tight I could barely speak. I just nodded, took the blouse from her hand, and fled toward the fitting rooms like a spooked animal. Inside the small curtained cubicle, I leaned against the wall, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This was insane. What was I doing? But I had to know. I pulled off my hoodie and undershirt, my reflection in the three-way mirror assaulting me from all angles. I saw the soft shoulders, the tiny waist, the undeniable breasts. With trembling fingers, I slipped the silk blouse on. The fabric cascaded over my skin, cool and light. It settled over my shoulders perfectly. It draped over my chest, not pulling or straining, but accommodating my new shape. It nipped in at my waist, hinting at the curve of my hips. It fit. It fit better than any piece of clothing I'd ever owned. I stared at my reflection. The cream color softened my features. The delicate garment made my body look graceful. For a terrifying, exhilarating second, I didn't see a man in a woman's blouse. I saw someone new, someone pretty. I shook my head, tearing my eyes away. This was wrong, but it was also necessary. Survival. My old brain, the pilot's brain, took over. This was a problem with a logistical solution. I needed clothes to function. These were the clothes that fit. It was that simple. I spent the next hour in a surreal daze. The compulsion guided me, telling me what I needed. Underwear first. I walked to the lingerie section in a cold sweat, grabbed a pack of simple, cotton panties and a plain, unadorned bra in a size that a small voice in my head just knew was right 34B. I didn't let myself think about it. I just grabbed them and walked away. I bought a pair of black, tailored trousers that fit my new hips perfectly. I bought more blouses. I even bought a pair of low, comfortable heels because the voice insisted my feet were shrinking and my pilot shoes would be too big. At the checkout, I paid in cash, my face burning with shame, convinced the cashier was judging me, laughing at me. She just scanned my items, smiled politely, and wished me a nice day. Walking out of the store with those shopping bags felt like the ultimate defeat. I wasn't just wearing a stranger's clothes. I was becoming a stranger. Every item in those bags was a nail in the coffin of Miles Larson. And as I walked home, a cold, horrifying thought surfaced a part of me. A deep, hidden, treacherous part. Was excited to try them all on. The 2 days leading up to my San Francisco flight were a blur of quiet horror and reluctant adaptation. I stayed locked in my apartment, a prisoner in my own home. As the transformation continued its relentless march, the voice, the compulsion, grew stronger, becoming a constant companion in my thoughts. It wasn't just guiding my actions anymore, it was teaching me. One morning, I woke up and stumbled into the bathroom. My reflection was softer than ever, without thinking. My hands went to my face, my fingers expertly dabbing moisturizer onto my cheeks. A product I didn't even remember buying but was now sitting on my counter. I found myself looking at my eyebrows, a thought floating up from nowhere. They need shaping. They're too bushy. I reeled back from the mirror, horrified. Where did that come from? I had never, in my 35 years as a man, had a single thought about the shape of my eyebrows. It was my knowledge, my very mind. That was being overwritten. The curse wasn't just a physical change. It was a full system software update. Complex aeronautical knowledge, things I had spent years learning, began to feel foggy, distant. I tried to recall the specific procedure for a 2-engine flameout on a Boeing 707, something I could have recited in my sleep. Now, the details were fuzzy, replaced by an intrusive, crystal-clear understanding of the difference between a foundation and a concealer. The world outside my apartment continued to warp around me. My pilot's license lay on my desk. I picked it up. The picture was still of me, but it was an older photo, From before, the changes had become so drastic, but the text, I swore the text had changed. Where it once said captain, the title now read first officer. I blinked, shaking my head. I must have been mistaken. Maybe it always said that, but a cold knot of dread in my stomach told me otherwise. My rank, my very position in the sky, was being demoted in real time. The morning of the flight, I put on my new clothes. The bra felt alien and constricting, the straps digging into my unfamiliar shoulders. The soft cotton of the panties felt shockingly intimate. I pulled on the silk blouse and the tailored women's trousers. They fit perfectly. When I put on my uniform jacket, it was a man's jacket, and it hung on me like a tent, the shoulders comically wide. It looked absurd. Just as panic set in, I noticed it. Hanging in the back of my closet, on a new hanger, was a different uniform jacket. It was cut for a woman's frame, with narrower shoulders and a slight flare at the hips. The epaulets on the shoulders had only 3 stripes. First officer. I didn't remember buying it. It was just there, as if it had always been. My old 4-stripe captain's jacket was gone. I put on the new jacket. It fit like a second skin. Defeated, I looked in the mirror. I saw a young, slender woman in a first officer's uniform. My longish hair was still a mess, but the overall picture was terrifyingly coherent. There was no trace of the man I had been. At the airport, I braced myself for questions, for ridicule, for security to be called. Nothing happened. The crew checked in, and no one batted an eye. They called me Miles, but their eyes registered a woman. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They saw a woman, but the name in their heads was male. The curse was holding my old identity in place with scotch tape and string, even as the reality of my new form was undeniable. The captain for this flight was Darren Fields, the man whose forearms I had secretly admired. He was leaning against the counter, laughing with one of the gate agents. When he saw me, his smile widened. "Miles, there you are," he said, his eyes doing a quick, appreciative sweep of my body. It wasn't the way a man looks at another man, it was the way I used to look at flight attendants, cutting it a little close. "Aren't we?" "Sorry, Captain," I said. My voice came out softer, higher than I expected, submissive. "No worries," he said, his gaze lingering on my face. "Say, have you done something with your hair? It looks good." Before I could answer, he turned and led the way to the plane. I followed, my mind reeling. He saw the changes. He registered me as attractive, as feminine, but he still called me Miles. The reality shift was incomplete, a bizarre, contradictory state that left me feeling like a ghost. In the cockpit, everything felt wrong. I sat in the first officer's seat. It felt like a demotion, a public shaming. I went through the pre-flight checklist, my hands moving with a strange new delicacy. I fumbled a few items, my mind cloudy on procedures that used to be second nature. "You okay?" Miles Darren asked, his voice laced with a faint, patronizing concern. "You seem a bit scattered today." "I'm fine," I mumbled, my face flushing with a mixture of shame and something else, a fluttery, nervous feeling that came from his attention. As we took off, and the plane climbed, I felt the familiar relief as the curse's effects paused. My mind cleared a little. The strange, fluttery feeling subsided, but this time, the sanctuary felt different. It was no longer a return to my old self. The pause button was now just holding me in this strange, in-between state, a woman in a first officer's uniform, with a man's name and a fracturing mind. The sky was no longer my kingdom. It was just a temporary reprieve from a new reality that was closing in on me. A reality that was not just changing my body, but methodically, patiently, and completely erasing the man I once was. The flight to San Francisco was 5 hours of agonizing tension. Every glance from Darren felt loaded. Every casual comment a potential landmine. When we landed and the wheels touched the ground, I felt a familiar, sickening lurch in my gut that had nothing to do with the landing. The curse was back online. We checked into the hotel, and I all but ran to my room, desperate for solitude. I locked the door and leaned against it, my body trembling. This couldn't go on. I was losing myself. I stumbled into the bathroom and braced myself on the marble countertop, staring at my reflection. My face was now entirely feminine. Any lingering trace of masculine bone structure was gone, replaced by a delicate, heart-shaped face, full lips, and large, doe-like brown eyes. My hacked-up hair now looked like a chic, messy pixie cut that framed my face perfectly. I looked like a stranger, a pretty girl who looked terrified. Then, a wave of dizziness and a deep, pulling cramp in my abdomen doubled me over. It was a pain unlike anything I'd ever felt. I collapsed to the cool tile floor, gasping. A strange, powerful energy was surging through my body, concentrating in my groin. It was a feeling of shrinking, shifting, and rearranging. It was an agonizing, violating process of deconstruction and reconstruction. I must have blacked out for a few minutes. When I came to, the intense pain had subsided into a dull, throbbing ache. I was slick with sweat, my breath catching in shallow sobs. Dazed, I slowly, fearfully, pushed myself up to my knees. I looked down. Where my male anatomy had been, there was now nothing. Just smooth, unbroken skin. Everything that had defined me as a man was gone. In its place was the perfect, complete anatomy of a woman. A scream tore from my throat, but it wasn't my scream. It was a high, terrified, female shriek. It didn't sound like me. It didn't sound like Miles at all. I stared at my new body, my mind completely detached, floating somewhere near the ceiling. This was it, the final change. The transformation was complete. Miles Larson was gone. He had been surgically, magically, removed from existence. A new name floated into my head, soft and certain, Melissa. My name is Melissa. The thought was so clear, so absolute, it cut through the panic. It felt right, more right than Miles had felt for weeks. I looked at the woman in the mirror, this new person named Melissa, and she looked back at me with my eyes. A strange calm settled over me. The fight was over. I had lost. Or maybe I had just arrived at my destination. My memories began to reshuffle, like a deck of cards being expertly dealt. The years of wanting to be a pilot, the pride in earning my captain's stripes. They became faded and distant. New memories bloomed in their place. Memories of wanting to be a flight attendant since I was a little girl, of being so proud to finally get my wings. Memories of always being a bit clumsy, a bit ditzy, but charming enough to get by. The knowledge of lipstick shades and how to walk in heels solidified, pushing out the last remnants of aeronautical engineering. I wasn't a demoted pilot. I was a brand new flight attendant, still learning the ropes. My pilot's uniform, lying in a heap on the floor, looked utterly foreign. It wasn't mine. It couldn't be. I looked in my suitcase, where my male clothes and spare uniform had been. There was now a new wardrobe. There were cute blouses, a pair of form-fitting jeans, a simple black dress, and tucked in the side pocket was a new uniform, not a pilot's uniform. It was a flight attendant's uniform, a stylish, navy blue dress, a jaunty little scarf, and a pair of sensible but cute black heels. Beside it was a new ID. The plastic card read Melissa Larson. The photo was of me of Melissa smiling a bright, slightly vacant, pretty smile under my name, my position flight attendant. I picked up the dress. The fabric was soft. I stripped off the ill-fitting pilot's uniform and let it fall to the floor. I stood naked in front of the mirror for a long moment, not as a man horrified by his new body, but as a woman taking inventory. My body was slender and curvy. With a 34C chest, they must have grown again during the final change, a tiny waist and flaring hips. It was a good body, a great body, even. Slowly, I began to dress in my new identity. I pulled on the pantyhose, my new instincts guiding my hands. I slipped the navy dress over my head. It fit like it was made for me, hugging my curves, the hem falling a few inches above my knees. I tied the little silk scarf around my neck, the knot coming perfectly and effortlessly. I put on the heels, and to my surprise, I could stand in them easily, my balance perfect. I looked in the mirror. A flight attendant smiled back at me. She was young, gorgeous, and looked ready for her first day of work. She was me. I was Melissa. My old life, my old name, my old body, they were just turbulence on the way to this moment, a bad dream I was finally waking up from. And as I looked at my reflection, a new feeling began to sparkle inside me, pushing aside the last vestiges of fear. It was excitement. I was cute. I was hot. And for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see what would happen next. Walking through the hotel lobby the next morning felt like a debut. I was Melissa, and this was my first public appearance. My new uniform dress swished around my thighs with every step, the heels clicking a confident rhythm on the polished floor. I felt exposed, and I liked it. Men's heads turned as I walked by. Their eyes lingered on my legs, my chest, my face. For the first time, I was the one being openly appraised, and the feeling was a dizzying cocktail of powerlessness and exhilaration. My old mind, what was left of it, would have been furious, insulted. But Melissa's mind preened. The attention was like a warm spotlight. I saw the flight crew gathered near the entrance, waiting for the shuttle. Darren was there, looking impossibly handsome in his captain's uniform. His back was to me. Ben, my old first officer, saw me first. His eyes widened, and he nudged Darren. Darren turned, and his jaw went slack for a fraction of a second. He stared at me, his eyes sweeping over me from head to toe. The look was pure, undiluted appraisal, the same look I used to give girls like Heather. "Well, hello," he said, his voice a low purr. He walked toward me, his professional captain's demeanor replaced by a smooth, predatory charm. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Captain Fields, Darren." My heart did a little flutter. My name? He didn't know my name. The last piece of the reality shift had clicked into place. I wasn't the weird female pilot named Miles anymore. I was a new face. "Melissa Larson," I said, my voice coming out breathy and sweet. I gave him a small, shy smile, one that I somehow knew would be effective. "It's my first week on this route." "Melissa," he repeated, tasting the name. "It's a beautiful name, and it suits you." His eyes met mine, and they were filled with the kind of intent that leaves no room for misinterpretation. "Welcome aboard. I have a feeling we're going to get along just fine." The shuttle ride to the airport was a masterclass in the art of the flirtation I had once perfected, now seen from the other side. Darren arranged it so I sat next to him. He'd lean in close to say something, his arm brushing mine, sending little electric shocks up my skin. He complimented my smile, my eyes, the way the uniform fit me. Every word landed like a tiny, perfect bullseye. I felt myself blushing, giggling, turning into the exact kind of girl I used to roll my eyes at. Part of me was screaming in protest, the ghost of Miles finding this whole display pathetic and transparent. But the larger part, the part that was now Melissa, was soaking it in. I felt pretty. I felt desired. On the plane, my role was completely different. I wasn't in the cockpit, I was in the cabin. My duties were to smile, to serve drinks, to make sure passengers were comfortable. It was simple, mindless work, and it left my brain free to buzz with the energy from Darren's attention. Before takeoff, he called me into the cockpit. Ben was there, and he just gave me a polite, professional nod. "Melissa, could you make sure I get a black coffee once we're at cruising altitude?" Darren asked. His voice all business now that Ben was present, but his eyes told a different story. They held a private promise. "Of course, Captain," I chirped, giving him my best customer service smile. Later, when I brought him the coffee, he accidentally brushed his fingers against mine as I handed him the cup. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt straight through me. "Thank you, Melissa," he said, his voice low again. "You know, there's a fantastic little Italian place near the hotel back in New York. You should let me take you there tonight, to welcome you to the team." The invitation was so blatant, so exactly the kind of line I used to use. "I'll show you my favorite spot." It was never about the food. "I'd like that," I heard myself say, my voice a soft murmur. The rest of the flight passed in a dreamy haze. The landing in New York was just a prelude to the evening. my heart hammered with a nervous anticipation that was entirely new to me. I had been the pursuer, the one in control. Now, I was the one being pursued, and the feeling of surrendering to it was terrifying and intensely thrilling. That night, he picked me up from my hotel room. He'd changed into a crisp shirt and dark jeans. He looked incredible. He took me to the Italian place, and it was perfect. The lights were low, the wine was expensive, and he was utterly charming. He listened to me talk, or rather, he listened to Melissa talk about her hopes and dreams of seeing the world, her silly anecdotes from training. He made me feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. After dinner, he walked me back to my room. At the door, he didn't hesitate. He leaned in, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek. "I had a really nice time tonight, Melissa." "Me too," I whispered, my breath catching in my throat. He lowered his head and kissed me. It wasn't a gentle, exploratory kiss. It was deep, confident, and claiming. It was the kind of kiss that leaves no doubt about what comes next, and I melted into it, my body responding with an eagerness that shocked me. All the strange new desires that had been bubbling under the surface for weeks erupted. I wanted this. I wanted him. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "Can I come in?" I didn't even have to think. I just nodded, unlocked the door, and led him into my room, into my new life. He was the captain. I was just along for the ride. The night with Darren was a revelation. To experience intimacy as a woman, from this side of the equation, was to discover a whole new spectrum of sensation, to be the one desired, the one pursued, the one taken. It was an intoxicating blend of vulnerability and intense pleasure. The ghost of Miles Larson watched from a distant corner of my mind, horrified and silent, as Melissa surrendered completely, discovering the powerful, cresting waves of a female orgasm that left her boneless and breathless. For those few hours, I felt cherished. Darren was attentive and skilled, whispering all the right things, making me feel beautiful and wanted. I fell asleep in his arms, a contented smile on my face, feeling like my new life was finally, truly beginning. I woke up to the sound of a suitcase zipping shut. Light was streaming through a gap in the curtains. Darren was already dressed, not in his uniform, but in his civilian clothes from the night before. He wasn't looking at me. He was checking his watch, his movements brisk and impersonal. "You're up," he said, his tone flat. The warmth and charm from last night were gone, replaced by a cool efficiency. "Good morning," I said, my voice thick with sleep. I sat up, pulling the sheet up to cover myself. A knot of unease started to form in my stomach. "Do you have an early flight?" "No," he said, not meeting my eyes. He picked up his room key from the nightstand. "Just things to do." He walked to the door. He didn't come back to the bed. He didn't kiss me goodbye. He just stood there, his hand on the doorknob. "Last night was fun," he said, the words sounding like a business transaction being closed. "You're a sweet girl, Melissa." And then it hit me, the casual tone, the slight distance, the finality. I had said those exact words, or versions of them, a dozen times. This was fun. "You're a great girl." It was the epilogue to a one-night stand, the polite, clean dismissal. "So, will I see you tonight?" I asked, my voice small, hopeful, and pathetic. I hated myself for asking, but I couldn't stop the words. He finally looked at me then, and his expression held a flicker of something, pity, annoyance. "I'm pretty busy this week," he said with a practiced, easygoing shrug, "but hey, I'm sure I'll see you around the airport." He opened the door. "Wait," I said, a desperate edge to my voice. "Darren?" He just gave me a final, dismissive smile. "Take care, Melissa." And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silent, sunlit room. The silence was deafening. I sat there, frozen, as the full weight of the moment crashed down on me. The scene replayed in my head, but this time, it was my own memory superimposed over it, Me walking out on Heather in that Chicago hotel room, the same cool detachment, the same casual dismissal, the same refusal to acknowledge the other person's hurt. I hope you know what it's like to be treated like an object, to be looked at and used and then tossed aside. I hope you know exactly what it feels like to be treated like some ditzy flight attendant. Heather's curse echoed in my mind, no longer a mystery but a perfectly executed lesson in karma. I had been forced to walk a mile in her shoes, her high-heeled, flight attendant-issue shoes. I had experienced the flirtation, the seduction, the night of passion, and the cold morning after abandonment. The circle was complete. A single tear traced a path down my cheek. It wasn't for Darren. It was for Heather. For all the Heathers. For the first time, I understood the pain I had so carelessly inflicted. The humiliation. The feeling of being reduced to a conquest. A fun story to tell the guys. I should have been angry. I should have been devastated. The ghost of Miles Larson certainly was, screaming impotently in the back of my mind about pride and revenge. But I wasn't Miles anymore. I was Melissa. And as I sat there in the wreckage of my one-night stand, a strange, new feeling began to bubble up, pushing past the hurt. It was a peculiar kind of acceptance, a dark, thrilling sense of clarity. This was my life now. This was my role. The curse hadn't just changed my body. It had changed my destiny. I was no longer the player. I was the game. I was no longer the captain. I was the crew. I looked at my reflection in the dark TV screen. I saw a beautiful young woman, her makeup slightly smeared, her hair a mess from sleep and passion. She looked heartbroken. Yes, but she also looked resilient. She was a hot, flirty flight attendant. That was my new identity, my new purpose. Darren was just one captain. There were hundreds of others, handsome, charming, powerful men who flew planes and spent lonely nights in hotel rooms, men who would look at me with the same hunger Darren had. A slow smile spread across my face, a real one this time. It felt knowing, and a little wicked. The hurt was already fading, replaced by a giddy, reckless sense of opportunity. The karmic lesson had been learned. But the punishment was starting to feel like a reward. I could be sad and lonely, or I could embrace what I had become. I stood up and walked to the mirror, looking myself straight in the eye. The tear tracks were already drying. Okay, so he was a jerk, I said aloud, my new voice soft but firm. His loss? I thought about the thrill of being wanted, the intoxicating pleasure of last night. It was a powerful currency. And I was rich. There are plenty of other planes in the sky, I mused, a giggle escaping my lips. I can always find another hot captain, and I bet the other captains would love to have some fun with me too. The Mile High Club. Miles Larson had treated it as his personal playground. Melissa Larson was about to become its newest, most enthusiastic member. The curse had taken everything from me, but it had given me something in return, a new game. With new rules and a thrilling, uncertain flight plan. And for the first time, I was excited to see where I would land next.